Hello and welcome back to Massalia Tales. On the last episode we faced off with the giant army of the Insubras, getting ourselves deliberately surrounded in order to try and defeat their separate armies one by one. It ended up not really going to plan, but a superb terrain advantage meant we won out in the end. However, I didn't have the opportunity to attack their base at Genua due to lack of movement points. I was forced to wait until the next turn, and when I tried to attack the apparently undefended settlement, a huge Helvetii army joined the battle, meaning I couldn't take the settlement right now and was forced to fall back to my own lands to regenerate troops and wait for a further opportunity. The Helvetii though chased me down and engaged Zenon's army on the border at Transalpania, the same place the Insubras tried to fight us in the beginning of our conflict. Luckily they didn't attack all sides of Zenon's camp, meaning he could sally out and attack the enemy to the rear, causing mass routes that ended up destroying the Helvetii force. Now we'll see the consequences of this. The warlike Helvetii people had long since considered the wealthy Insubras of Cisalpania to be a rival. In fact, even before the Insubras were defeated by Zenon, they had been threatening to storm the tribal capital at Mediolanum and usurp the power of the Insubras chieftains. They were delighted when the Insubras begged them for help against Zenon's seemingly unstoppable army. The political leverage the request afforded them turned the Insubras' royalty into vassals to their own tribe, marking the beginning of a Helvetii-led confederation against the Greeks and in part the Romans. But they would quickly see that even this could not stop Zenon. Here are the battle results from our defense against the Helvetii force, now renamed the Celtic Confederation. We lost only 100 troops, defeating over 3,000 of the enemy's warriors. An absolutely perfect result for Zenon and his men. Massalia is kept well safe by the result of that battle. So following on from this, the question was what exactly is going on with the Celtic Confederation. They seem to own both the Helvetii lands and the Insubras lands. They've confederated these two tribes together, but the Helvetii are the apparent leaders, which would make sense since the Insubras were all but defeated just before the Confederation started. They absolutely hate me, according to the diplomacy. I wondered if I could leverage peace from our victory just now, but that is not the case whatsoever. They hate me so much that the war will go on, and this probably means they have more forces in reserve somewhere. I know just the Romans actually quite like me at the moment, and even got them to accept trade, slightly increasing our income, although trade benefits the Romans much more than it benefits us. Still, that is something good to celebrate. Now I decided I'm going to take my chance to try and take Genua once again. This time, it's much more lightly defended than before. No more Helvetii armies or Confederation armies now are hanging around in the area, so I can go in and make an attack. The balance bar is very much in my favour, so I decided I'll try some form of auto-resolve. I went with the aggressive stance. I'm going to wipe out the enemy and take Genua for myself. The worry is that losses caused by this battle might mean the enemy can retake it off me in the near future. It's only a close victory, despite the fact the enemy lost far more troops than us, just because they were losing low quality troops. Our troops are much more of a loss with each death. But still, Genua is ours. We have captured this area for the good of Massalia. The question is whether this will be more of a problem than it is a reward, because it's somewhat rebellious, this province, especially because it's very Celtic led. The upside is that Mediolanum, the capital of the province, is undefended and within one turn's march of Genua, so it's a superb place to launch an attack on that superior location. Genua itself is going to experience some public order problems, as I alluded to, especially because the culture is very much Celtic. They are not going to enjoy this Hellenic rule that we're going to attempt to impose on top of them. Still, we're going to have to hold out, because if I can hold Genua, that will keep the battle away from Massalia, which is an excellent move. I do need to build some temples to try and convert some of the local population to support Greek culture, but my lack of money means that's not going to happen for a while, so we're going to have to hold out for a bit. The Confederation also have a small army hanging around near Massalia. These are leftovers from a previous battle. Zenon and his forces are enough to hold them off, so I'm not going to worry about them at all. But as we go into the next turn, another Celtic Confederation army appears and attacks Genua. I think this is the second Helvetii main force that in the past my spy Ifyanasa had worked out was hanging around in the mountains. According to the balance bar, they don't have a great advantage. Our force is very depleted, but it's so elite and powerful that even against this large barbarian horde, we apparently stand a good chance. So I'm going to fight this battle myself, attempt to absolutely minimize casualties. We do have an absolutely tiny garrison army backing us up as well. That's something.
I can smell our enemies from here, men. Fear does that to barbarians. Fear and strong drink. They would not stand to fight unless their bellies were swollen with booze. We will empty them presently. Make ready.
It's time to pleasantly empty the enemy's bellies of booze. Here they come, advancing in no particular formation, leading with their sword units, which is a good idea. Those swords will do well against the spears that I'm going to have defending these choke points. This choke point here is defended by my citizen militia. These are, it looks like one unit actually, but it's actually I think 5 regiments of 16 men all attached together, and jointly they form what looks like one regiment. Hopefully that'll be able to hold off there. This wider choke point is held by some of my main forces. I've got tons of reserves, mostly my light forces, including the levies, and my cavalry, who I'm not going to use until I'm sure the enemy have committed themselves. I also have a long line of defense here, a thinner line of hoplites ready to hold out against the enemy's advance. The overall plan being to hold out until the enemy has committed all of their forces and then attack them to their flanks. Perhaps there is not much glory to be had in slaughtering a downed opponent like these Greeks, but that is not how today will be remembered. You will remember today as you sit on your new family estates as the day you became the pride of your tribe, the day you showed your ancestors that their trust in you was deserved. By taking this land for our tribe, we gain the lesser Insubris people as our loyal servants, seeing that only we have the strength to protect the land they could not. All brave Helvetii men shall be seen as chieftains in this land. Anyway, enough talk of the reward. The work is yet to be done. Kill them all! As expected, the enemy make their advance right into my choke points, and delightfully, they only focus on 2 of the 3, meaning that I have an avenue of escape from my defensive position from which to attack the enemy in the rear. The majority of the enemy's force is coming at my thinner line, 3 regiments wide, but only a couple of men thick. Their cavalry smash into this line. They almost get through it. Luckily, it's just enough to hold the enemy off. And once the enemy are locked in place, their infantry won't do much to charge through the line. I'm backing that area up with some levies just in case it does break. They also have a large force coming right at my citizen militia. I backed them up with some of my militia hoplites from the 3rd choke point just in case the enemy get through, but actually their charge was very slow and unenthusiastic. The militia received them easily and locked them in combat. This narrow choke point means their giant numerical advantage is worth very little, although they do actually have a man-to-man advantage, so gradually they'll be able to fight through that hoplite line. The same is probably not true in the larger engagement, where the enemy's spears and swords won't do so well against my more elite spearmen. Now, because the 3rd choke point has not been attacked at all, I'm going to sally right out of it and commence my plan to attack the enemy in the back. I've got all of my cavalry to play with. The only risk is that the enemy seem to have some reserves they haven't committed, reinforcements coming onto the field as well, but I don't think there's any chance of them reaching the engagement before I've initiated my rear attacks, so I'm going to go right for it. The enemy locks in place fighting along the line have pretty much no idea what's going on behind them. They seem to just remain locked in the engagement, even though the men at the back aren't doing any good whatsoever, whilst my cavalry rush in and destroy their local missile units with 1 regiment, and I'm going to use 2 other regiments to hit the block attacking the citizen militia in the back. They charging into the rear of spearmen, so it's dangerous if the enemy don't break right away. They'll turn around and do damage to my cavalry. Luckily, they all break because of the charge, and they're breaking forwards into my hoplites, meaning they can't really escape. As they try and get out of there, the hoplites are going to be cutting them down one by one. So some of them will escape because they can get through the lines because of how the game mechanics work, but a lot of them are going to be killed, especially because my cavalry are going to keep marauding them to the rear. It's very bad news for these members of the Helvetii tribe. We're going to wipe out about 4 to 5 regiments of enemy troops. In fact, the balance bar now looks even. You might have noticed that in the beginning of the fight, the balance bar was actually really far in the enemy's advantage. The balance bar on the campaign map said otherwise, so I think the balance bar mechanics are still somewhat broken. Anyway, that aside, I've now got my infantry round the back of the enemy's main force, and of course the infantry can't do the same job as the cavalry. I could pull my cavalry out of this engagement, but I was having too much fun letting them cut down those enemies, so instead of giving a devastating cavalry charge to the back of these men, it's going to be a more weak infantry charge. The question is, will they still rout as a result of this attack by my hoplites? And the answer to that question was very luckily yes. I actually didn't think they would, but it was enough to spook them that this entire blob of enemies starts falling back. Excellent news, some of them will fall back right into my troops and be slaughtered. The troops who were fighting them are going to chase them down to try and inflict the maximum number of casualties possible. The enemy still do have reserves, which means the battle isn't already over. There's going to be a long period of time to allow me to chase these men down and kill as many as I can, even before the battle comes to an end initially. Looks like my javelins are also doing some damage to those men once they're locked down by my hoplites as well. Getting my cavalry in to finish off as many of them as I can. Some of the enemy's missile units actually came back from routing and started doing damage to my cavalry. Luckily I noticed right away, charged the cavalry at them, the cav bombard them with javelins and then rushed them down. Absolutely no hope for these missile troops. I guess they can't surrender, they're too proud, and instead they're simply being slaughtered. Now the enemy's reserves did come in to attack me towards the end of the battle. The most effective attempt was with this unit of cavalry, which came in and got locked down by some of my spears, but very cleverly got out of that engagement and instead charged right towards my light troops, which were completely exposed in the middle of town. Very luckily, a couple of leftover citizen militia units which were standing on a street corner distracted the entire regiment and prevented them from charging into my light troops. Then those light troops began engaging the enemy cavalry with javelins and slings, completely wiping them out and routing them from the field. So that could have been a dangerous way to lose some of my light troops, but actually went surprisingly well. After those cavalry routed, the remaining enemy forces fell back even before I began to engage them, meaning that it's a heroic victory for Zenon's forces. Absolutely excellent. I thought we might lose some regiments there because some were on the edge, but actually that went very well. In fact, it almost went single-figure losses well. Not that well, unfortunately. 11 losses for Zenon's men, but over 2,200 losses amongst the enemy army. A completely perfect victory for all intents and purposes. Zenon's depleted army was not depleted any further and will now get its chance to regenerate in peace. The Celtic Confederation will not be retaking Genua anytime soon, unless of course they have even more forces, although their size isn't large enough to make that likely. The Reti clan though does appear with forces near Mediolanum, potentially annoying because now I can't take Mediolanum in this turn. At least Genua is now somewhat stable. It's lost some of its public order, but the public order isn't going down. I now have some more money, meaning I can begin the construction of a temple that will improve public order and spread some Hellenic culture in the area, which will further improve public order in the future. Now the Rieti force means I can't attack at the moment. 20 regiments strong is probably an equal to my force, especially if it combines with forces from Mediolanum itself.
Welcome.
So I'm going to have to leave the Confederation alone for now. They don't want to go into peace with me, which does suggest they have more forces somewhere, but personally I don't believe they do because their small economy can't possibly allow for it. The Romans don't go into a defensive alliance with me, which is rather mean because they seem to really like me, they just don't trust me all that much. Anyway, going into the next turn, the Rieti force moves away from Mediolanum, meaning that potentially it is vulnerable to attack. We also see an interesting political situation. The Averni are now at war with our old enemies, the Sestani, a war which has our territory right in the middle, which potentially could be ruinous, but I'm going to ignore that situation for now and focus on Mediolanum. You can see their Rieti agents hanging around. They had been trying to play some shenanigans with Zenon's forces in Genua, but they were not successful. We're going to move on. The question for me is the Rieti force just out of view, and is it going to reinforce Mediolanum if I attack? But seeing that Patavium had been taken by the Rieti during the last turn, I assumed that their forces must still be there. They must be fighting the Romans in that area, meaning I would be free to attack the city, and that is indeed the case. There's no reinforcing army. It's just this small standing force and the garrison. The garrison is already somewhat depleted. The balance bar is in our favour, This looks like it's going to be an opportunity to take this key provincial capital for Zenon's forces without too much difficulty. To all free peoples of Cisalpina, I wish to urge you all not to let one defeat lead to another. In your understandable hatred of me and my companions, you have dealt yourself into servitude with a tribe who are your lessers, an arrangement that will persist long after me and my men have seen our years grow short. You must see that they care not for your rights as an independent tribe, but only for your lands and riches. As a client of Massalia, you will have freedom far beyond what your supposed kin offer you, and of course you will not have to worry about your security ever again. Think carefully before you choose to raise a hand against me. So here is Mediolanum ready to be attacked, and you might notice a few things look slightly different. This is because this replay was filmed using the Impera edition, whereas the actual battle took place before the Impera edition was released. This means that some things are quite different, the main difference being I don't have any siege ladders. The siege ladders have been replaced by these light galleys in the new version. Quite strange. This means that effectively this battle replay can't possibly go as it really did in the real fight, but I'll do my best to explain what really happened. The opening move is actually pretty similar. What I did was get all of my slingers to move around to attack this part of the wall here, which was covered in enemy archers. The archers don't have quite enough range to hit the slingers, so I could gradually whittle them down with my slingers. However, in this replay, all of my slinger brigades for some reason target one unit that is quite far away from the wall, and as a result they have to move towards the enemy position. The archers who are there then start firing at them, so my men are going to be slaughtered unfortunately. I guess it's because the enemy unit positions are actually different in this replay to how they were in the real fight. It seems the changes made by the Emperor edition are quite far sweeping to actually change the replay in this way. Very strange. Now you can see my forces behind the galleys moving up. At this point, the ladders, which would have been where the galleys are, would have been moving forwards, and these troops moving forwards behind them will be acting as reserves in the actual fight, just moving up ready to follow the leading men up the ladders. Meanwhile, my slingers have decided to just stand around and not even sling at anyone anymore. They're just going to wait for the arrows to gradually destroy them. Not going to go so well for them. An unfortunate battle replay corruption from their perspective. Now if you listen here, you can hear that the men on the galleys are shouting as if they're receiving attack orders. This is because at this point in the battle, they would have been actually up over the walls fighting the enemy on the land just over the side of the palisade. And these guys who have now stopped in front of the wall would have been going up the ladders behind them as reserves. Instead, they're just standing around taking enemy arrow fire and taking fire from the enemy's towers. I decided to try and demonstrate using these paint tools what exactly happened. The enemy came round to try and stop me coming over the palisade here, and a very large Maulish engagement took place right underneath the enemy's tower. You can see curiously my galley actually thinks it can get inside the walls there, but it's still not moving. Anyway, I eventually pushed them back. We pushed them back around towards the gatehouse where another Maulish engagement took place. A very heavy engagement, especially because the enemy's towers were inflicting heavy casualties on my men. The enemy pulled some skirmishing light forces back round to attack my guys in the flanks. However, I managed to actually capture the gatehouse, and I could pull in all of my reserves, including my cavalry and my heaviest units. So we destroyed the enemy there, and that actually constituted about 75% of the enemy's army destroyed at that point. The remaining forces were right back here defending a victory point and defending the choke point in front of it. I moved up with my heaviest units, with Zenon leading them, to engage them below another tower. In fact, very inconvenient, the tower was taking out quite a large number of my men actually. But after the defeat of the one unit holding the choke point, I moved over to the victory point. The remaining enemy units suddenly routed off the field, and a victory was won for Zenon's forces. But obviously you can see that in this replay, that's probably not going to happen because I can't even get inside the town. We'll find out what really happened and see the actual battle results next time on Massalia Tales. Bye.